Okay, welcome to respiration. So our cells get energy by aerobic respiration, which requires oxygen and then produces carbon dioxide. Okay, and the oxygen production, of course, is going to happen in the mitochondria. Now, inside the lungs, diffusion occurs between the air and the blood by way of a very delicate and very thin exchange surface called the respiratory membrane. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The cardiovascular system circulates blood carrying oxygen from the lungs to the peripheral tissue. It also accepts and transports carbon dioxide generated by this peripheral tissue and delivers it back to the lungs to be eliminated. So the cardiovascular and the respiratory systems cooperate to supply oxygen and to eliminate carbon dioxide. If either system fails, our cells die rapidly from oxygen starvation and waste buildup. The respiratory system is involved with gas exchange, smell perception. It filters the inspired air. It's involved with sound production and also waste elimination. Now, the respiratory system has the function of ridding the body of excess CO2 and bringing in O2. And there's actually two types of respiration. We can call one simply respiration, and the other one is referred to as cellular respiration. So respiration, okay, the first type is an exchange of gases between the cells and the atmosphere by way of the blood. And there's three steps to this process. There's going to be ventilation, gas exchange, and the gas exchange can be both external, well, it is both external and internal. But let's look at each step individually. In the first step of respiration, we have what's called pulmonary ventilation, or simply breathing. We have inspiration, or the inflow, and the expiration, the outflow of air between the atmosphere and the lungs. Okay, we breathe in, we breathe out. Then we have external or pulmonary respiration, and this is the exchange of gases that occurs between the lungs, that is the air spaces in the lungs, and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. Okay, so this is external or pulmonary respiration, when we have the exchange of gases between the air spaces and the blood that's in the pulmonary capillaries. We have another exchange then. Oh, by the way, the external is going to enable the pulmonary capillaries to gain oxygen and be able to rid of CO2. Now, the internal or tissue respiration is going to be an exchange of gases that occurs between the blood in the systemic capillaries and the tissue cells themselves. Okay, so it's going to be between the blood in the systemic capillaries and the tissue cells. And therefore, this is going to be where blood loses oxygen, and it's going to gain as well. By losing the oxygen, it also gains CO2 to take out and get rid of. There's another type of respiration, which we can sort of refer to as oxygen utilization, and this is cellular respiration. These are the metabolic reactions that occur inside the cell that consume oxygen and give off carbon dioxide, but producing ATP. Okay, so that's the cellular respiration. So we have respiration, which involves ventilation, external and internal respiration, the three types, and then we have cellular respiration. The respiratory system consists of two portions, the upper and the lower. The upper is the nose and the throat, which we know is called the pharynx, and the associated structures. And the lower portion of the respiratory system is the larynx, which commonly is called the voice box, the windpipe, which we call the trachea, and the bronchi and the lungs. So the cutoff is going to be the pharynx. Above the pharynx is the upper, below is going to be the lower. The branch of medicine that deals with the ears, nose, and throat, or ENT, is called otorhinolaryngology. Okay, a very difficult word, tongue twister, but that is what we call ENT. Okay, let's look then at the organs of respiration. And here's a nice picture first showing you the upper and the lower. We can see here the upper is going to be the, we said is going to be everything above the pharynx, which is about this level here. And then below this level here, we have the lower portion. So we have the pharynx, the nose is going to be here. And then from about this point, we have the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs. Okay, here's another picture of it. So here we see the larynx very well. That's the epiglottis, which covers the opening to the larynx. And here you can see the nasal cavity, which is going to be connected to the oral cavity as well. There's a connection here. And you can see then we want to be very careful where food goes from the pharynx. We don't want it going down into the trachea. Okay. Let's look at some of the anatomical structures. In the nose, we have the external nose, and this is the framework of bone, hyaline cartilage, skin, and muscle. It is very flexible. We have the bridge of the nose, which is made up of the nasal bones, and the root of the nose is this portion right here that makes contact with the frontal bone, okay? With the forehead or the frontal bone. That's the root, that's the bridge, okay? We also have an apex, which is the tip of the nose right down here, and we also have the dorsum nasi. The dorsum nasi is really the part of the nose that we identify as being straight or crooked or hooked, okay? This is what gives you in profile the shape of the nose, which is the anterior borders of the nose, okay? So we have left and right sides, but this is the dorsum nasi, the anterior border, and in profile, it can be straight, convex, concave, or even wavy. We also have the external nares, which is right here, or the external nostrils. These are the two openings on the under surface of the nose. Internally, we have a large cavity. Here's another view of the frontal bone, and then you see here the root, and the root is like about here, then the bridge, then the apex is here. We have wings, the ala of the nose. Right underneath that, we have the vestibule, but we'll get to that. And then the dorsum nasi is the anterior portion. Actually, it's really this part right here, but it kind of reflects over to the sides a little bit. But the dorsum nasi really is this portion right on above the septum. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at the nasal cavity internally. It's a large cavity in the anterior portion of the skull. The space inside is called the nasal cavity, and it communicates posteriorly with the pharynx by two openings called the internal nares. Okay, and they would be right about here. This is a mid-sagittal section, so you're only seeing one half, but this is the internal nares on the, this would be on the right side of the nose, okay? We also can see that we have ducts from sinuses here, and we have the lacrimal gland also opens into this cavity. So we can take a look and see that, for example, there's an opening from the ethmoidal sinus over here. There's an opening from the maxillary sinus over here. The sphenoid sinus is here, so its opening is right there. And there's an opening of the frontal sinus right over here, and so forth. Here's the opening of the nasolacrimal duct right here. Okay, tears go into the nose. Okay, and we have these ducts and sinuses then, as well as the opening to the lacrimal gland. We have the nasal septum, which divides the nasal cavity into right and left halves. We have the nasal vestibule, which is right in here. And that's if you stick your finger in your nose, you're sticking it into the nasal vestibule. A vestibule is sort of like a little anteroom. It's not even a room, it's very small. Older houses have a vestibule. It's sort of, you pass through the exterior doors and you enter this small space that maybe is for shoes and coats. And then there's another door which leads maybe into the foyer of the home, if it's a fancy house, or directly into the living room. But it's a very small antechamber where you enter. So is the vestibule of the nose. It's a small antechamber before you really get into the proper cavity itself. Okay, so the septum, the vestibule, and in the vestibule, there's also going to be some coarse hairs which filter out the dust particles. And these nasal hairs are called vibraceae, and they filter out macroparticles that might otherwise be inhaled. Now, there's also the nasal conchae, and there's superior, inferior, and middle. These are three shelves that extend out of each lateral wall, and they're lined by a mucous membrane that is covered with olfactory epithelium. And these form three grooves or passageways called meatus. Okay, each one is called a meatus. And in them, the air gets warmed up in this region. So you can see here we have here, for example, down here, we can see the inferior concha, okay? And then you can see over here the middle concha, which has been cut, and then there's the superior, but it's not really shown, but you can see the meatus, the opening here, and underneath each one, under each shelf, there's going to be this meatus or opening for warming the air in this region. Okay, so you have shelves, okay, lateral walls, and they form grooves or passageways that each one is referred to as a meatus. So you have a superior, a middle, and an inferior groove or meatus or passageway. The function of the internal structures, all of them together, are to warm, moisten, and filter the air. They receive the olfactory stimuli, and they modify speech because it is a resonating chamber. Now, the shelves that we spoke about, the conchae, these are, as well as the nasal cavity itself, the entire nasal cavity is lined by olfactory epithelium, which is a mucous membrane with goblet cells that secrete mucus, which is for moistening the air and also trapping the dust particles. It's a pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium, and the cilia actually move the dust mucus-type particle or particles towards the pharynx so that they can be eliminated either by swallowing or by expectoration. Okay, so you have this olfactory epithelium. It really is a pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium, and the cilia are going to move the mucus that traps the dust towards the pharynx, and then you eliminate it by swallowing or by expectorating. Okay, let's move on then to the pharynx, which is the next portion. And the pharynx is about 5 inches long. It is posterior to the nasal and the oral cavity. It is anterior to the cervical vertebrae, okay? So it's behind the nasal and the oral cavity, as you can see, but it is also anterior to the cervical vertebrae. It extends from the internal nares to the larynx. So this is the internal nares, and it extends to the larynx. The larynx is right over here. So it's going to be all of this portion in here. This is all the pharynx, 5 inches long, okay? So it extends from the internal nares to the larynx. The wall is made up of skeletal muscle and mucous membrane. It is going to contain a nasopharynx, an oropharynx, and a laryngopharynx. Okay, so it's subdivided into the nasopharynx, which is right the portion behind the nasal cavity, the oropharynx, which is right in the oral area, the oral cavity area, and the laryngopharynx, which is right by the larynx. Okay. Now, the nasopharynx is lined with a pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. However, both the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx, okay, both of these are, we should mention, both are respiratory, and they have both a respiratory and a digestive function. So they're a common passageway for air, food, and liquids, and both the oro and the laryngo cavity are going to be lined with a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So you see then we go from a pseudostratified ciliated columnar, okay, a columnar, to a squamous, a stratified squamous, non-keratinized in the oro and the laryngo cavities. And remember that the oro and the laryngo are part of both respiration and digestion. Okay, so the oro and the laryngo are part of both respiration and digestion. They're a common passageway for air, food, and liquids. Okay, next we move into the larynx. Okay, and so we can see here again we see the internal nares. Okay, and we can see the nasopharynx, the oropharynx. Okay, and the laryngopharynx, a little lower. Okay. Here's a nice picture of the concave, the shelves that we were looking at earlier. The superior here, they're intact, superior, middle, and inferior. Okay, and the meatuses, which are the grooves that are formed as a result of the shelves. You can see they label the meatuses superior, middle, and inferior. This is a better picture for that. Okay. Anyway, the larynx is about 3 inches in length. It's a short passageway that connects the laryngopharynx with the trachea. So it connects the laryngopharynx with the trachea, which is about here. Okay. Now, the larynx is composed of 9 cartilages. Okay, 9 cartilages. Now, the first cartilage is the thyroid cartilage. Let's go to a better picture for that. Actually, I think we're going to stop here for a moment, and we'll continue in just a minute.